Of Kittens and Broken Things, Chapter 30. Kara streamed back into Garrus's arms as though falling through warm honey, with nothing to stop her but him. The blanket was clutched in a tight grip with one hand between her breasts, her eyes meeting his. He must have been staring at the door because his eyes were so easy to find, and it was so easy to see that he wanted to see her. She had her headache and heartache, and he had his. But that was one more shared experience, and they wanted more of those, more places to connect. She launched herself at him, knowing he'd catch her. The blanket fell away and slid to her hips, her hands on his face and his hands on her back, her mouth finding his. She had been right and wrong. He took her intelligence away, but also so much of her shyness and uncertainty. So many things that had been theoretically wrong were proven right and true. It was an inalienable right to be loved this much, to love back with all the rush of glow and gravity.
Garrus had every moment of the dreams of the last several years of his life validated by her smile, his doubts dismissed by her return, by her need to be back in his arms. Faith, like steady pressure, rose and built into a new atmosphere he could breathe deeply, an atmosphere that did not escape through cracks and fissures of doubt and worry. This was sealed and sure, standalone faith, there because she was in his arms and had proven what he felt was true, had been true, would be true. It transmuted grasping to holding, stuttering force into steady control, billowing and strong. They built reverie back into the sustaining flow it gave them when they kissed, headache and body aches soothed and forgotten. He wanted every word and no word, everything at once, all the freedoms he could count, all the firsts crowding in, but his hands on her hips and his tongue exploring her smile slowed down the bottleneck of flooding possibilities into what would perfectly fit each moment with time to savor each possibility. Something that he'd cultivated while she was gone, which he'd paradoxically lost and gained because of her flooding back. Patience. She would go his way. He wanted to celebrate patience. He wanted to celebrate having time and being able to see her eyes and hear her voice. Celebrate that she'd be asleep in his arms again, and he could enjoy every moment. He'd tried to define her as his standard, and that was true. But the contrast between them was a constant wonder and miracle that he could not get used to no matter how much he tried. He gave up on normalizing her influence on him. He lost his balance, his expectations always defied with reverie in her skin. He murmured, "You're a myth in my mind, and when I touch you, you're so small. And I say young lady and good girl alongside Limieth and Commander. I don't think I can get used to you, Kara. I don't want to get used to you. Do you get used to me, or am I big and hard every time?"
Small and soft are not usually admired in Turian.
He nipped at her throat. "Answer the question, young lady."
She tilted her head back. Big and hard every time.
Are you just saying that because you can't think?
Maybe. But it sounds true.
And if I say it, that you're small and soft, and I love that, can you hear it in a voice that means you're admired and not the alternative?
Yes, I think you can call me a filing cabinet. Though I'm probably not tall enough to qualify, I'm also not getting any taller.
I've noticed, and I've discovered new frontiers in Next Train.
So my life's gonna be endless short jokes? It sounded lovely. Shared intimacies and understanding.
Not jokes. Okay, some jokes. I don't think I can help it. I'm going to be calling you so many names for tiny things with lots of superlatives about soft appreciation. Maybe even verging on fetish. I'm apologizing in advance. I don't want to belittle you. But you are so little. So very little. Spirits, and I love seeing you blush, and you can't fight back, and I can't stand it. I have to say something, do something about it.
I'm not getting any taller, and I'm not running away.
Running away. Yeah, don't try that again. That first time, I nearly attacked you on the conference table. Whenever I look at that table now, I mourn my lost opportunity. Will you come back with me to my office and let me hold you down on that table?
Let you? No, but now I know to never go in your office again.
He huffed against her throat. Tell me yes, please, right now. Someday, Kara. Maybe even the door. You said you couldn't be like me, can't be casual, but you don't have to be like me. Let me be like me. You be like you. You don't have to do a thing but moan. Or how about official tour, CIC, galaxy map?
She flushed, and her head tilted back, dizzy. She couldn't argue, but also couldn't agree, and couldn't say why. Modesty and intimacy crowding in on her. She was thrilled that he wanted her, horrified to imagine it, but she did. Her tongue and brain didn't work, but her skin and blood conspired, as always, into a hard flush.
He laughed and licked a long line up her throat, hands curved down and around to cup her ass, saying, Your skin is so beautiful. You look and taste so good when you blush, Kara. I love that you can do that. I love that I can make you do that. I want to apologize for that also, but I know I'm going to. I hope you never get used to me. I hope you like paying attention. I promise I won't ask you to do anything that you don't want to do, and never in front of anybody else. But I'm going to ask you to think about it. See, I just promised I won't ask you to do something you don't want to do. But that's a lie. I know it. I can promise to not force you. But spirits, I'm afraid that's a lie too.
You're persuasive. Her eyes were closed, head tipped back and spine melted, his arms the only thing keeping her upright.
He kissed a line along her collarbones from one side to the other and to her other ear. So, you told me what my voice felt like and what my hands feel like. What does it feel like when you come with my tongue on your beautiful, small, soft body?
A deeper crimson sped through capillaries, and her skin was prickled hot. His mouth on her shoulder and neck, his hands supporting and caressing her tingling back. She tried to think through his deliberate attempt to make her faint from words and images alone. But she wanted him to know. So she said, like I'm a solid, and then a liquid, and then a gas.
I love it when you talk science, Kara. Explain it to me.
Oh, well, it's about the application of heat.
That's me, right?
Yes, that's you.
Good.
Don't make me say it.
I'm just asking a question.
You're making me crazy.
You started out that way.
Oh, right.
Okay, then maybe you've explained it all non-verbally. I told you all you had to do was moan and you had that covered. That and the screaming.
She was relieved, dizzy, anticipating the next pass of his mouth on her collarbone and his hands along her spine, and he obliged.
So, are you going to try that out on your own now? We should have had sex before, you decided. Change your mind about anything else? Are you going to touch yourself now when I'm gone? Or with me watching? You on a conference table, for instance?
What? No!
Her head jerked up and his hands moved to steady her while he made sure she didn't stab herself with his mandibles. Easy, Kara.
Don't say things like that, then.
Humans do it all the time, I've been led to believe.
Not me.
Why, didn't you like being a gas, bubbling, and flashpoints?
Yes.
But not alone?
No.
So, why?
I told you.
Tell me again. I thought new information might change things.
She shook her head briefly. It would be lonely.
We've got some lonely times ahead, Limieth. What about when I call you? I can listen to you come if you help me out with that.
No,
Really? Even if I ask really nicely? Why?
because you can't. You'd still be alone. You can't feel it. It wouldn't be fair, and I want to need you. You wanted to be in need. Now you're in need. Why are you arguing with me about this? I don't...
It wouldn't be fair. Spirits, Kara, you are the strangest little neck-straining person, and you have to make things difficult and wonderful.
And expensive?
Was that a joke?
Maybe.
You are so beautiful. I'm graced by your bond, and you make me want to be a better man.
And I love you so much.
Just not enough for the galaxy map.
That will never happen. I might have to change my running away stance. You have to work on that better man thing.
Later. She laughed, and he shifted her back along his thighs until he could lean down and touch his mouth to her breast, one hand at her back, angling her hips into his, open plates rubbing at the skin of her thighs. Her head was tipped back and her eyes closed. He found her hand with his and guided her to his cock, her fingertips gingerly careful, curious, and tentative. He lifted his eyes to look at her face, determined concentration in her expression, her teeth worrying at her lower lip. She was painted with his scent, thick blush and outrage with the soundtrack of assertion of absolute abstinence unless he was touching her. Now her expression was studious with her attempt to touch him, learn him because he asked. Her eyes clamped tightly closed. The blend of inexperienced and tentative, somehow one of the most counterintuitive but strongest turn-ons he'd had the pleasure of feeling. Different fuel, different flame, different flashpoint. He focused on getting those moans from her, his mouth and hands on her breast. Her hand was barely on his cock, paced to gentle and studious, not teasing or demanding. Everything she felt from the way he touched her translated into her hand on him. If she gasped, she squeezed. If he let up on pressure, she'd rise up against his mouth and his fingertips, and she'd lose her place, cool, flat palm and little pads of fingertips. He lifted his knees to support her back, one hand shifting to her mouth, his thumb along her lips. She looked blissful at the stroke of his hand, and she made no move to take his thumb into her mouth or use her tongue. Just the pleasure of his caress clear on her flushed face. He shifted her back, covered her hand that was on his cock with his own, and moved until his cock was fully extended and pulled down, twisting against her palm and pressed between her thighs. Wet, hot glide against her clit. She wasn't going to look, but he was. He watched her tense and embarrassed face, but her discomfort melted from solid to liquid, and her thighs tensed and pulled up, then relaxed back with a soft moan of surrender. He guided her hand, but she also moved on her own, his cock twisting and seeking her, that patch of wet heat against him causing reverie to start pumping into them in a tease that lit them both up like blush on her skin. Of all the words of small things that occurred to him, the verse came most to mind. An exquisitely small and beautiful creature, mammalian, fleeter and more clever than most of the more lumbering life on Palaven of plate and claw. Hail had brought them to mind, but the verse were lower to the ground, 6 legs, more angular than rounded, sculpted fur, and, unlike human domesticated cat, venomous and poisonous. The comparison suited Kara well, and the name inside his head had grown in significance, but he hadn't wanted to explain that she was named after one of the greater scourges to Turian hopes of domesticating something beautiful or being able to live in relative harmony. There were only a few relics that contained verse hide, but the animal got its revenge there, the poison that made them inedible extending through the hide and fur. Touching it, crafting it, wearing it, would result in exposed hide, eroding away very slowly, leaving lesions that scarred over and reopened unpredictably. Verse were unable to be kept as pets or domesticated. Draw their fangs in venom, and still their fur had envenomed microbarbs in them comparable to nettles. Beautiful but unpredictable and ornery. If there was a colony around any domesticated animals, livestock would often attempt to hunt the verse, and if they caught one or more likely were bitten and then evaded, livestock would die. So they had been driven out and hunted where they could be, and often they just had to be lived with and fences specialized to keep them from jumping over or tunneling under. Yet still in the Turian soul remained the desire to have one that would not bite or would not be as stubbornly resistant to every attempt to domesticate or train them. A historically unconquered aspect of Palaven in a tiny, deadly, infuriating shape. She was a verse, and he loved her. Part of him frustrated beyond belief at her recalcitrance, and part of him knowing exactly how difficult it was historically, or even mythically, to have one as a companion. Inescapable in the admiration of inherent beauty and grace was the under-the-breath curse of stubborn as a verse burrow. Seeing a verse was a bad omen, but every Turian child wanted one. Most Turian adults as well, even after having to take all the practical precautions to protect themselves from the animal's insidious advance into food stores. He was just about ready to speak her true name in huffs against her skin, in her ear, with her hands spread under his and around, moans and writhing. She would welcome his cock when he pressed inside, welcome his finger inside her mouth, small teeth and soft hair, fleet and ornery. But not with him. Not when she was abandoned like this, eyes closed and telling him that he was persuasive. She still would be verse in nature, would not be domesticated, would require extra work, be venomous and poisonous despite her desire to stay. She would turn and bite and dart back to her warren, not alone, joining the snake that could navigate those tunnels with her. Garrus would come to the edge of the forest when she swished her tail, and he'd follow her into the dark. He'd stare at the forest edge when she wasn't there, willing her to arrive, listening to the whispers of the wiser and older Turians mutter about verse dreams and sometimes being bitten is what you deserve for spending the day on behavior that many a Turian before him had proved was a waste of time and possibly deadly. But Garrus had always done quite a bit of dreaming, and there had always been part of him that thought, "There's so many things that haven't been done yet. Maybe if I figured it out." But he wasn't the prophesied tamer. He had rarely seen a verse, never got close enough to approach. Maybe he'd think he was onto something, then his hide would run to bleeding, then scarred, and he didn't care. Some things were worth it. In fact, he sometimes wished he had more scars to go with his life story. She was worth it. But verse dreams were not the same as real verse, and never would he be able to have the ideal, soft, domesticated creature curled up in his lap. The strength of the myth was reflected in the strength of the caution, but the end goal of the myth was to have a creature unable or unwilling to do any harm to the owner, the conqueror. It was against the Palavani soul to be killed, maimed, and defied so completely by something so small. But he would be, if he put her the wrong way, if he tried to prove that she had no venom, no fangs. He would have a bad day, and possibly a snake's attention. But right now, with her small, soft writhing in his lap, and his finger along her lips against blunt teeth that would never think to bite, in fact might never think to open unless he insisted. He needed to work on that better man thing later. For now, his verse had her claws in him, her teeth on him, her fur rubbing against him, and he was mythic. She was through his hide, of his scars, of his wounds and worth. She would be the death of him, one way or the other. Now she was arched back, her head back so far her throat was bared, moans and whimpers in his name. Spirits, the way she said his name. His finger pulled in finally to tongue and heat. He'd lost the sight of her eyes, but he wouldn't lose her voice until he'd earned it. She came after a panting build to helplessness, her thighs trembling. her hand now tight on him and driving the rhythm she needed, learning her own way and teaching him, with him fascinated again by the way her body moved, the frantic drive of her hips, the shift of her breaths, and the convulsive gasp and groan of her bared throat. If he drove into her like he did before, he'd lose her right away. So instead he moved her legs so her knees were down on either side of his, lifted her up with a hand on her ass, guiding his cock into her about an inch and then stopping, blurred and dizzy from the rush and the drive of her body wanting him sheathed deep inside. He didn't let her, honoring the patience, keeping her voice, leaning to her and whispering, "Not yet, my verse. Stay here with me just a little while longer." He licked along her bared throat and kept her from giving in to gravity with his hand. She was glorious and weak, eyes closed and voice loud and hoarse, her hips gaining some of him before he withdrew, and she tried harder. She was about to lose consciousness, and he pulled her back from that, her panting breath gone beyond knowing his name, his mouth at her throat and her new name murmured in her ear. He gave her his voice, his cock, his hand on her ass and his finger on her clit until she arched back and surged. He held her in place while her instincts tried to drive her onto him harder, and she could not do it, weakness in his arms making it impossible. He kept her right there, pulling her back when she was close to passing out, with her wanting to stay awake but wanting with the urge of her human body to fall. She came again, frantic and fevered, pulling him in deeper with a shift to her hips that she hadn't discovered yet until his vision blurred. Spirits, he needed to remember she could do that. He braced her arms on his chest so she could rise up on her thighs with his hands on her ass, keeping her up when she faltered, hair down over her face and his heart ready to burst from the beauty of her. She got weaker and weaker, more frantic, more instinct, hungry and whining, trembling. He let her take him until she was about to pass out over and over, and then began to lower his hands, made it harder for her to find consciousness, harder for him to keep from driving in and staying, as hard as it looked for her to stay conscious. His eyes started to blur and his growl overcame her whine. Her arms and legs lost their strength and she fell, and he let her, and she screamed, and he listened, his arms tight around her, pushing her down and in until she was gone, and he followed, a kiss to her hair, a blanket thrown over her back, and bliss in his blood. This time she wasn't out as long, and neither was he. An hour for him, 2 hours for her. Contentment suffusing him, affection for his verse and love for his mate and gratitude for his efforts that brought him here. She woke slowly into a lazy smile and a light blush when she looked at him, not speaking until she realized her legs were entirely numb and she'd been mostly folded in half long enough that he did have to carry her. Parting wasn't impossible on the strength of faith and caution, knowing that they both would come back together soon enough, and that headaches were mild if they took medication and paused often to kiss, which they did, gladly.
She didn't wear much in the way of clothes, favoring a robe that matched the color of her eyes, and Garrus favoring nothing. He took human showers with her, leading her to ask, "This place looks very different. You had it renovated?"
I did the renovations.
"Why not just make it all Turian?"
You might not believe me when I tell you.
"I will so."
No, you seem to think I'm a great deal more... Maybe sane's the word. Maybe detached is the word. Maybe both. Than I really am or ever was. You seem to think that before I bonded to you, I was not interested in you other than as a remote commander.
Do I? Did I? I'm sorry. I think I died with forced distance. I came back to life with it, and yeah, sometimes I think of me as an impulsive mistake you made.
Yeah, and I know that. I'm not sure how to convince you otherwise. Maybe here's proof. I haven't been back here since you came back to life, but I was here often. It was my place to be near you. I spent a week here a few times a year, and Well, you know I talk to you every day, but here I could be with you. I'm not sure I can explain, but the idea of having a Turian chair without an equivalent chair of the same quality for you, it would have been wrong. This was our place. I made up that math after you died. Here was yours, and then it was mine, and I chose to make it ours. I thought if you had a ghost, she'd come here, and I didn't want to miss her.
Garrus.
See, now I've made you cry.
But you made me believe.
It was crazy, I know, but
It wasn't crazy. I didn't have a ghost, but I'm here now.
do you remember being dead?
No.
I can't tell if that's disturbing or reassuring.
Maybe I was here.
Then you wouldn't be surprised by the renovations.
Maybe. I only looked at you.
What? This is quality work here.
Why is there only one big chair, though?
Well, this is our chair, not my chair. You were supposed to be in my lap.
Food, inspiration, and the perfect plan-ahead chair. Garrus, I'm sorry I died. I'm sorry I didn't tell you that you glowed. You should have known that every day. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry I wasn't with you. I'm sorry I couldn't keep you alive. I'm sorry that wherever your ghost was, she wasn't here and she didn't know she had a home.
Garrus, what's a verse?
I'll show you. He pulled out his Omni tool and showed her a picture.
Wow, that's like a cat lizard dragon. Does it breathe fire?
Might as well. Poisonous and venomous, and the scourge of Palaven, making the Turians slightly jealous.
That bad?
Worse than you think. Beautiful, smart, fast, fluffy, deadly, insulting.
You are so good to me. I don't have a nickname for you.
I just like that my name can mean anything. You sold me on that.
You're kind of like a dinosaur, but I can't call you that.
Why not?
Oh, Tyrannosaurus Rex.
See, now that just sounds sexy.
That was a terrible sex voice.
It was fine, verse.
If you say so, Garrus.
I say so. Now you have to say my name that way. Every time. Starting now.